Hey there, I'm Joanna Fruhoff, and welcome again to another episode as we tour Israel. I'm glad that you're considering joining members of the Gracious Vine and Paoli bands as we travel through the land of Scripture in October of 2020. We'll unpack some of the most fascinating sights and get a better grasp of some of the amazing stories of the Scriptures. For more information on our upcoming trip and a full itinerary, go to our website www.graciousvine.com and click on the links at the top of the page for Israel. In this episode, we'll be visiting Caesarea Philippi, the Banias Preserve, Tel Dan, and the Golan Heights, all in the northern and higher reaches of the land of Israel. After a good hearty breakfast, we'll head to the northern areas of Israel. We'll journey up through a portion of the Rift Valley, along the Hula Preserve, a valley where billions of birds migrate to and from both Africa and Asia. We'll drive about an hour and a half, making our way up north. Caesarea Philippi. This city was on a main roadway that headed toward Damascus and was here in some form since 200 BC. It was renamed and built by Philip, Herod the Great's son, in honor of Caesar and himself. It was added to and enhanced further by King Agrippa II, the great-grandson of Herod the Great. You can walk on paths that go above the caves and give you a bird's-eye view of the park, the ruins, and the trails. Originally, this city was called Banias, in honor of the Greek god Pan, and later Banias, which was the Arab version of the word. As we walk the ruins, we'll learn that this area was the hub of activity for idol worship. It was an area where many Canaanite Baals were worshipped, along with several Greek and Roman gods. This was not a Jewish city. It was purely secular, it was hedonistic, it was revolting to the Jews of faith, and a terrifying place of vile practices. The cave and the niches that you see in the rock wall were where idols stood, offerings were brought, and sacrifices were made and burned. This area was a horrifying place of blood sacrifices to the Baals and Pan. The bloodlust was so prevalent that the tranquil river that flowed below the caves often flowed red. One particular awful event took place here. After the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Romans brought all the captured Jews from the land and murdered them here in public games. The blood sacrifice was at the delight of Rome. There was a very large sanctuary and temple built in front of this large cavern and abyss. This cave was called the Gate of Hades, or the Gates of Hell. This was where worship to Pan took place. Pan is the half-man, half-goat god of the Greeks. He was terrifying, lustful, and a violent god of the wild, of sheep, and of nature. Satan and Pan are akin to one another. It is said that in his fury and anger, that his scream would cause men to be overcome with fear to the point of hysteria. And this is where the word panic originates. He is a god of fear, a terrorizer of the sheep, one who lustfully prowls in the dark and attacks people when they are not expecting it. A panic attack is much like that. And it is when you have been pan-attacked, when he has assaulted you. Scripture tells us repeatedly, "Do not fear, fear not, I am with you, I will guide you, I will protect you, I will uphold you." Repeatedly to the leaders and the people throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, believers are told to be steady and fear not. We're told in 1 Timothy 1:7 that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. It is to this place Jesus intentionally brings his disciples. They travel here from the Galilee region about 30 miles directly south as a bird flies, taking hours, if not more than an entire day, to get here by foot. Up from the lower terrains, over hills and through valleys and gorges, walking a full day or more. There's no record of Jesus performing any miracles or preaching any messages at this location. So why did he come here? He brought them here to encounter one of the strongholds of the people of the time, fear and idolatry. It's here that we read in Matthew 16:13 through 18, that Jesus asks his disciples a very pointed question. Who do you say that I am? And Peter bursts with a revelation. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Then Jesus proclaimed, Blessed are you, Simon of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock of revelation, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, or the gates of hell, will not prevail against it. Jesus brought his disciples to a place we wouldn't think he would bring them to declare to them that if they get a revelation of who he is in any circumstance of life, that it is there that the power of the gates of hell and the spirit of fear can be broken. When we have a revelation of who Jesus is in our life, in our situations, his perfect love casts out and casts down all fears. This is when fear is crushed, when Pan is dead, and the gates of hell cannot prevail or overcome us. The Banias Nature Preserve. Next, we'll be making our way from Caesarea Philippi to the Banias waterfalls. As we do this, we'll need to be walking about 3 miles through the gorge along the flowing spring water that has flowed out from the base of Mount Hermon, which is Israel's tallest mountain, where we were standing at Caesarea Philippi. We will walk along the suspended walkway and steps to the impressive Banias waterfall, which is the largest in Israel, about 33 feet high. And during the spring or the winter, the water crashes down and mists those who are standing close on the observation deck. Enjoy the beauty of the woods and the natural surroundings. This water from Mount Hermon eventually will find its way to the Sea of Galilee. Tel Dan. The largest of 4 water sources of the Jordan River begin with the Dan Springs, which emerge also here at Tel Dan from the base of Mount Hermon. It flows for about 4 miles before joining the second largest source of the Jordan River, which is the Banias Springs, which we just saw. Here in this area is a Middle Bronze Age gate that was built about 1800 BC. This mud brick gate was eventually covered by an earthen rampart, which also preserved it. The style of the gate is typical for this period. It's a Syrian gate with 3 pairs of piers and 4 chambers, kind of like the ones that we found yesterday at Mount Megiddo. This is a gate that Abraham would have needed to enter through. It seems as if he had spent some time in this area. Its original name during the patriarchal period was not Dan, but Laish. It wasn't until several centuries after Abraham, when the children of Israel conquered the Promised Land, that's when the tribe of Dan conquered it and renamed it. So what's interesting about this arched gate? It's thought and taught that the arches are a Roman invention. Yet here, 1,000 years before Roman civilization even existed, a city with a 7-foot triple-arch mud brick gate exists. Additionally, here at Tel Dan is the high place of Jeroboam. Nearly all archaeologists agree that this excavated podium was the one that Jeroboam constructed to house the golden calf at Dan. Evidence of a 4-horned altar has also been found, as well as religious objects such as iron shovels and a small horned altar and iron incense holders. So what makes this place such an interesting location? It's here, going as far back as the grandson of Moses, Jonathan. About 1340 BC, he founded a dynastic pagan priesthood, which lasted until the days of the tribe of Dan's extinction in 723 BC, when they were all killed or taken captive by the Assyrians. Jacob, the patriarch, when dying in Egypt, spoke prophetically over each one of his sons. And over his son Dan, he said that he would be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path, making the rider fall backwards. In other words, he was going to be the one who would trip up the people of God. The tribe of Dan is who set up and started most of the idol worship in the kingdom of Israel, starting with Micah in Judges 17, who stole silver coins and then had them made into a pagan idol. Years later, when Moses' grandson, Jonathan, and his sons were here, they set up a priesthood after the city was conquered by the Danites. Finally, when the kingdom was split between Solomon's son Rehoboam and 2 tribes in the south, and Solomon's servant Jeroboam with 10 tribes in the north, the new king Jeroboam devised a plan in his own heart to turn the people away from God to worship idols, with many other similar practices of the Jewish priests mixed in, to give the people a false sense of following the God of Abraham. Sadly, his legacy is that he was continually blamed for the wickedness and the idolatry of every single successive king without fail, for turning their hearts of the people of God against him with idolatry. This was a stronghold of idolatry that every generation and all 10 tribes of Israel were guilty of practicing from the early days, shortly after getting into the promised land, until the time that they were all swept away by the Assyrians. Nearly 700 years of idolatry against God, against the very God that had given them the land and delivered them from Egypt. The Golan Heights. The Golan Heights is in the northern regions on the eastern side of the upper Jordan River. It's a basaltic plateau from ancient volcanoes, bordered by the Yarmouk River in the south, the Sea of Galilee and the Hula Valley on the west, Mount Hermon and Lebanon on the north, Syria in the east, with Jordan in the south. The Golan Heights were captured from Syria in the Six-Day War in 1967. This area in the Bible is called Bashan and was conquered by the Israelites during the reign of King Og. Throughout the Hebrew scriptures, the Golan was the focus of a power struggle between the kings of Israel and the Arameans, who were based near modern-day Damascus. After Assyrian and Babylonians ruled, the Persians dominated the region and allowed it to be resettled by the Jews after the Babylonian captivity. Jewish cities were destroyed eventually in 600 AD by the Arabs, who conquered the area and destroyed all organized Jewish settlements. Later, in the 16th century, the Golan was conquered by the Ottoman Empire, and in 1918 it came under a French mandate, which was then terminated in 1946 when it became part of the newly independent Syrian Republic. In 1967, the Six-Day War, Israel regained this territory, and since then, most of the Golan Heights have been under Israeli rule. There is a United Nations Disengagement Observer Force that has set up various locations to create a buffer zone and to implement the ceasefire of the Purple Line. On March 25, 2019, President Donald Trump proclaimed that the United States now recognizes the Golan Heights as part of the State of Israel. The U.S. is the first to make such an acknowledgement. We're now going to head back down into the lower parts of Israel, down to the Sea of Galilee, where we will spend the night. Join us for the next episode as we journey to Capernaum, the Mount of Beatitudes, the Gennesaret Kibbutz, and the Yardenit, the River Jordan, where we will renew our baptism. If you have any questions about our upcoming trip and tour of Israel in October of 2020, please feel free to reach out to us. Go to our website, graciousvine.com, and make sure that you click on the links or email us at graciousvine@gmail.com.